Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel where we break down chess games with a fun and instructive twist. Today, we're diving into an interesting battle between opponent and OngoleBull, featuring an unknown opening that stays pretty balanced until a key moment around move 7. So, buckle up and let's get right into the opening phase. White kicks things off with e4, staking a claim in the center and opening lines for the queen and bishop. This is textbook opening play, aiming for quick development and central control. Black responds symmetrically with e5, matching White's claim in the center and setting the stage for a classical pawn structure. Both sides are following solid opening principles here. White develops the knight to f3, attacking Black's e5 pawn and preparing to castle kingside. This move also helps control the center squares d4 and e5. Black brings out the knight to c6, defending the e5 pawn and contesting the d4 square. This is a very standard developing move, supporting central tension and preparing for further piece activity. White plays d3, a more modest pawn move supporting the e4 pawn but not immediately challenging Black's center. This move signals a quieter, more positional approach rather than the aggressive d4 break. Black develops the knight to f6, attacking White's e4 pawn and continuing smooth piece development. This move also prepares for kingside castling. White brings out the bishop to e2, preparing to castle and solidifying the kingside. This is a flexible developing move, but here is where Black starts to gain a slight edge. The evaluation shifts by about 1.1 pawns in Black's favor shortly after. Why? Because Black's next moves will challenge White's center more dynamically. Black plays bishop c5, placing the bishop on an active diagonal targeting the vulnerable f2 square. This move increases pressure on White's position and supports potential central breaks. White castles kingside, completing development and safeguarding the king. This is standard and necessary for king safety. Black strikes in the center with d5, challenging White's control and opening lines for the pieces. This is a critical thematic move. The key idea here is to break open the center when you're ready to activate your pieces and exploit weaknesses. White captures on d5 with e takes d5, accepting the pawn exchange and opening the e-file. This is natural but also invites Black to recapture actively. Black recaptures with knight takes d5, developing the knight to a strong central square. However, here Black misses a better move. Queen takes d5. Taking with the queen would have kept more pressure on White's position and maintained better control of the center. The knight is active but slightly less flexible than the queen in this case. White plays bishop g5, pinning Black's knight on f6. This move aims to create tension and potentially weaken Black's kingside. But White misses a tactical opportunity here. Knight takes e5 would have been stronger, grabbing a central pawn and challenging Black's setup more aggressively. This is a classic example of how tactical awareness can change the course of the game. Black responds with f6, breaking the pin and forcing White's bishop to decide. This move is double-edged. It weakens Black's kingside but is necessary to free the knight. White retreats the bishop to d2, keeping it safe but losing some momentum. This is a cautious move, but it allows Black to consolidate. Black castles kingside, completing development and securing the king. This is a natural and important step, especially after pushing f6. White pushes c4, aiming to challenge Black's knight on d5 and gain space on the queenside. This move signals White's intention to fight for central and queenside control. Black jumps the knight to f4, an aggressive post putting pressure on White's bishop and eyeing key squares around White's king. This knight move is a strong tactical idea, leveraging the open lines created earlier. White captures the knight with bishop takes f4, removing the immediate threat but giving Black the chance to recapture and open the e-file. Black recaptures with e takes f4, opening the e-file and gaining a semi-open file for the rook. This also creates imbalances. White has a knight advantage, but Black has active bishops and open lines. White develops the knight to c3, reinforcing control over the center and preparing to support the d5 square. This is a natural developing move. Black plays a6, a useful waiting move preventing White's pieces from jumping to b5 and preparing for potential queenside expansion. White responds with a3, stopping black's bishop or knight from coming to b4 and securing the b4 square for potential future use. Black places the bishop on d4, centralizing it on a strong diagonal and increasing pressure on white's position. This move also eyes the c3 knight and supports potential tactics on the kingside. h3. White plays h3 here, a useful prophylactic move aiming to prevent black's pieces from invading g4. This is a common theme when you want to stop pins or annoying piece placements, particularly from black's dark squared bishop or knight. It's a quiet move, not changing the evaluation much, but it keeps white's kingside structure intact and prepares for future maneuvering. Bishop f5. Black develops the bishop to f5, putting it on an active square where it eyes the c2 pawn and supports central control. This is a natural developing move, reinforcing black's grip on the center and preparing for potential kingside expansion. Rook b1. White plays rook b1, a subtle move that prepares to contest the b-file and supports the b2 pawn. This rook lift can also support a potential b4 push later on, aiming to challenge black's bishop or expand on the queenside. Knight e5. Black's knight jumps to e5, centralizing and increasing pressure on white's position. This knight is very well placed, eyeing key squares like c4 and f3, and it challenges white's control of the center. This move also sets up tactical possibilities, especially with the bishop and queen poised to coordinate. Knight d5. White counters by placing the knight on d5, contesting the central squares and challenging black's knight on e5. This is a critical moment where both sides are jockeying for control of the center. The key idea here is to maintain strong central presence and look for tactical opportunities. Knight takes f3 check. Black captures on f3 with check, a very forcing move. This is a critical tactical decision because it disrupts white's kingside pawn structure and forces white to recapture. By exchanging the knight for white's knight, black aims to weaken white's control over key squares and open lines for an attack. Bishop takes f3. White recaptures with the bishop, maintaining material balance but losing the knight pair. This keeps the position complex, but white's kingside structure is slightly more vulnerable now. g5. Black pushes g5, aggressively expanding on the kingside and threatening to dislodge white's bishop. This move signals black's intention to seize the initiative and create attacking chances. The key idea here is to gain space and open lines for black's pieces to become more active. Bishop g4. White retreats the bishop to g4, keeping pressure on black's kingside but missing a stronger alternative. Rook e1 would have been better. Rook e1 would have supported the e4 pawn and prepared to contest the open e-file more effectively. This is a subtle but important strategic nuance. Bishop g6. Black moves the bishop to g6, maintaining pressure on white's position and supporting the pawn on g5. This keeps black's kingside initiative alive and restricts white's bishop mobility. Bishop e6 check. White plays bishop e6 check, giving a check, but this move actually worsens white's position significantly, with the evaluation dropping by almost 1.9 pawns. The better move here was bishop h5, which would have kept more tension and avoided helping black consolidate. Why is bishop e6 check problematic? First, it allows black's king to step to g7 safely, and second, it misplaces white's bishop, making it a target rather than a threat. This move also fails to create meaningful counterplay and helps black improve their position. The takeaway here is to be cautious with forcing moves like checks. Always ask yourself if the check improves your position or just helps your opponent develop. King g7. Black calmly moves the king to g7, sidestepping the check and keeping the position solid. This is a good practical decision, as it avoids any tactics and prepares to support black's pawns and pieces. Bishop g4. White retreats the bishop back to g4, but this move doesn't improve white's position and the evaluation remains heavily in black's favor. White is struggling to find active plans here. c6. Black pushes c6, a strong strategic move aiming to solidify the center and restrict white's knight on d5. This move also prepares to open lines or push further with c5, gaining space on the queenside. This is a textbook example of using pawn breaks to improve piece activity and control key squares. Knight c3. White retreats the knight to c3, losing central presence and allowing black to seize more space. This move further cements black's advantage, as white's pieces become more passive. Bishop takes d3, black captures on d3, winning a pawn and increasing material advantage. This move also opens lines for black's rooks and queen, intensifying pressure on white's position. King h1, white moves the king to h1, a passive move that doesn't address the mounting threats. A better alternative was knight e2, which would have helped defend key squares and prepare to challenge black's strong bishop. This is a critical missed defensive resource. Bishop takes f1, black captures the rook on f1, gaining a decisive material advantage. This move puts black clearly ahead, as now black has an extra rook and pawn for a knight. Queen takes f1, white recaptures with the queen, but the material deficit is already overwhelming. Black's extra rook and active pieces dominate the position. Bishop takes c3, black captures the knight on c3, further simplifying and increasing material advantage. The evaluation remains heavily in black's favor. B takes c3, white recaptures, but the position is now clearly lost. Black's extra material and better piece coordination are decisive. Rook b8, black places the rook on b8, eyeing the open b file and preparing to invade white's position. This is a natural and strong move, increasing pressure on white's queenside. Bishop f3, white tries to activate the bishop, but this is too little too late. Black's advantage is overwhelming, and white's pieces are too passive to mount any real defense. Queen d2, black centralizes the queen on d2, coordinating all major pieces and preparing to deliver the final blows. This move consolidates black's winning advantage and leaves white with no counterplay. Rook d1, white plays rook d1, bringing the rook to the open d file. This is a natural attempt to contest black's control of the center and activate the rook. However, at this stage, black's material advantage and piece activity already give them a commanding position. The key idea for white here is to create counterplay along open files, but black's pieces are too well coordinated to allow that easily. Queen takes c3, black captures the pawn on c3 with the queen, increasing material advantage and further weakening white's pawn structure. This move also threatens to invade deeper into white's position. Notice how black's queen now dominates critical squares and supports potential rook lifts. This is a textbook example of converting a material advantage by grabbing loose pawns and improving piece activity. Rook d7 check, white checks with rook d7 check, trying to disrupt black's coordination and gain some breathing room. This is a reasonable attempt to create tactical complications, but black's position is solid enough to absorb this pressure without trouble. Rook f7, black calmly blocks the check with rook f7, reinforcing the 7th rank and maintaining control. This move also prepares to support the queen and keep white's rook at bay. The key idea here is to neutralize white's threats efficiently while keeping material and positional advantage. Rook d6, white moves the rook to d6, but this is a missed opportunity. The evaluation drops significantly here because white could have played rook takes f7 check, a forcing move that would have at least complicated the position and potentially regained some material. Instead, rook d6 is passive and allows black to consolidate further. Why is rook takes f7 check better? By capturing on f7, white forces black's king to recapture and opens lines for white's queen and bishop to become more active. This would have created tactical chances and slowed black's dominance. The takeaway: always look for forcing moves like captures or checks in losing positions. They might give you practical chances to complicate the game. Queen takes a3, black captures the pawn on a3, increasing the material lead to 3 extra pawns. This move also threatens to invade white's back rank and supports black's rook on the b file. Black's strategy here is clear: simplify the position by winning more material and preparing for a decisive endgame. Bishop h5, white plays bishop h5, trying to activate the bishop and create threats against black's king. However, this move is a big mistake, dropping the evaluation drastically. A better move would have been queen d1, aiming to defend key squares and keep the queen active in defense. Why is bishop h5 so bad? It walks into a tactical shot where black can capture the rook on d6 next, winning decisive material. Also, bishop h5 doesn't create any real threats against black's king, so it's essentially a wasted tempo. The lesson here: before making aggressive-looking moves, always check if your pieces are protected and if the move creates concrete threats. If not, it might be better to consolidate or defend. Queen takes d6. Black captures the rook on d6 with the queen, winning a major piece and practically sealing the game. Now black has 2 extra rooks and a huge material advantage. This move highlights the importance of capitalizing on your opponent's mistakes immediately. Bishop takes f7. White captures black's rook on f7 with the bishop, trying to regain some material. While this is a natural attempt to fight back, it's too little too late. Black's overwhelming material and positional advantage remain decisive. King takes f7. Black recaptures with the king, centralizing the king in the endgame and maintaining a massive material lead. This move also keeps black's rook and queen free to coordinate for the final attack. Queen b1. White moves the queen to b1, aiming to create threats along the first rank. This is a last-ditch effort to generate counterplay, but black's advantage is just too large. Rook d8. Black places the rook on d8, controlling the open file and cutting off white's queen from entering critical squares. Interestingly, the engine suggests king g7 would have been even stronger here, keeping the king safer and preparing to support the pawns. This shows how even in winning positions, precise moves can speed up the victory. Queen takes h7 check. White captures the pawn on h7 with check, trying to force black's king into a less comfortable position. This is a natural attempt to complicate the position, but black's material advantage and piece coordination make this ineffective. King e6. Black's king steps forward to e6, centralizing and escaping the check. This move also supports black's pawns and prepares to push forward. The key idea here is that in the endgame, an active king is a powerful piece, especially when you have a material advantage. Queen e4 check. White checks with the queen on e4, trying to harass black's king. However, this move misses a better defensive resource, king g1, which would have kept the queen safer and avoided further loss of material. Queen e5. Black blocks the check with the queen, maintaining control and preparing to push the advantage further. This move also keeps the queen active and ready to support black's pawns. Queen f3. White moves the queen to f3, but this is another missed opportunity. The engine suggests queen b1 would have been better, keeping pressure on black's position and avoiding immediate threats. Instead, queen f3 allows black to increase the pressure dramatically. Queen e1 check. Black checks with the queen on e1, forcing white's king to move and increasing the attack's intensity. This move highlights the importance of active piece play in winning positions. Black is not just sitting back but relentlessly pressing the attack. King h2. White's king moves to h2, stepping out of check but remaining vulnerable. This move is forced, but it shows how white's king safety is compromised. Rook d1. Black doubles down by moving the rook to d1, threatening to invade white's position and coordinate with the queen for a decisive attack. This move increases the pressure and limits white's options. Queen g4 check. White checks with the queen on g4, trying to create counter threats. However, this is ineffective given black's overwhelming material and positional advantage. f5. Black pushes the pawn to f5, a powerful move that cuts off white's queen and prepares to deliver a forced mate in a few moves. This pawn push is a classic example of using pawn breaks to restrict the opponent's pieces and finalize the attack. Queen takes d1. White captures black's rook on d1, trying to reduce material and survive longer. This is a natural defensive attempt but ultimately futile. Queen takes d1. Black recaptures with the queen, maintaining a decisive material advantage and a forced mate sequence. At this point, the game is effectively over. White plays g3, pushing the pawn forward. Now, this move is a bit of a missed opportunity. The engine shows black is already winning by a huge margin here, but g4 would have been stronger, trying to clamp down on black's pawn structure and slow down the assault. Instead, g3 weakens white's kingside dark squares and opens lines for black's pawns to invade. The key idea here is that in such desperate positions, you want to limit your opponent's pawn breaks and keep your king safe as long as possible. Black responds with f takes g3 check, capturing the pawn with check. This is a crushing move because it opens the g file and forces white's king to react immediately. The alternative f3 would have been even stronger, locking down white's king and preventing any escape squares. But even this capture is devastating. Black's pawns are rolling forward like a freight train, and white's king is completely exposed. White captures back with king takes g3, taking the pawn. This is forced, but it walks right into black's plan of pushing pawns to deliver checks and restrict the king's movement. The key idea here is that when your king is forced out into the open, every pawn push by the opponent becomes a direct threat. Black plays f4 check, another check. This move is powerful because it continues to drive white's king into a corner and keeps the initiative. Notice how black's pawns are acting like pieces here. Each push is a tactical strike, not just a slow advance. White's king has very limited squares, and black's queen and pawns coordinate beautifully to tighten the noose. White moves king g2, trying to stay close to the pawns and avoid immediate mate threats. But this is a tough spot. White's king is hemmed in and can't escape without losing more material or getting mated soon. Black pushes f3 check, continuing the relentless checks. Here, the engine suggests king e5 would have been better, activating the king to help block black's pawns and create some breathing room. Instead, pushing the pawn directly is a strong practical choice, but it misses the chance to finish the game faster by bringing the king closer to the center. White's king returns to king g3, forced by the check. This back and forth shows how vulnerable white's king is, and how black's pawns are effectively acting like a net, cutting off escape squares. The key takeaway here is that in endgames, an active king is crucial, and white's passive king is a big liability. Black plays a5, pushing a distant pawn. This might look slow, but it's a strategic move aiming to create a passed pawn on the queenside and distract white's king. The engine suggests king f5 would have been stronger here, bringing the king closer to support the pawns and speed up the mate. This shows an important endgame principle. When you have a winning position, activating your king and coordinating your pawns is often more effective than slow flank moves. Alright, folks, what can we learn from this final phase? First, when you have a massive material and positional advantage, don't just rely on brute force. Use your king actively and coordinate your pawns to close the game quickly. Second, for the defending side, always look for moves that activate your king and create counterplay, even in tough spots. And finally, remember that pawn pushes in the endgame can be just as powerful as piece moves, especially when they restrict your opponent's king and create passed pawns. Thanks for sticking with me through this deep dive into the endgame. Keep practicing these ideas, and you'll find your own games improving dramatically. Until next time, keep those kings safe and those pawns marching. Checkmate is just a few moves away.